Expert about the outcome of yesterday's inter-Korean military talks, as well as recent reports that North Korea are still continuing to develop its nuclear program despite its promises to denuclearize. But first, we catch up on the latest headlines with Devin Whiting at the News Centre, who has the latest on the record heatwave that we're all suffering here in Korea. It's definitely quite a scorcher, Devin.
It is that. Hi, Jang-ho. In fact, it's the hottest day in Seoul since records began more than 100 years ago. As of about an hour ago, it was 39 degrees in the capital. And in the east of the country, it's topped 40 degrees for a new national all-time high. Hard to believe, but as our Hongyu reports, it looks like the heat wave will get worse in the next few days.
Today, Seoul recorded the highest temperature the city has seen in its modern history, 39 degrees Celsius. People are hiding in the shade and fanning themselves, but there's almost no escape. This extreme weather is expected to continue until Friday. Even at night, it'll just barely get below 30 degrees, which is what scientists call a tropical night. Right now, almost the entire country is under a heatwave warning, the only exception a narrow strip on the east coast, which is on alert.
This heat rate is what they call a discomfort index, so my son and I are constantly looking for some shade. I'm also worried about electric bill because we've been sleeping with the air conditioning on every night.
It's like every time you walk outside of the building with air condition, it's like you have a really hot wind inside. And we are from Denmark, so we are not used to like this weather. So it's really hot.
Just standing outside for a few minutes can make you sweat and feel dizzy. The hot weather is keeping many people indoor. Even this famous tourist spot is quieter than usual. Gwanghwamun Plaza in downtown Seoul is usually filled with tourists visiting the nearby royal palaces and office workers going out for lunch. But there weren't many of them today. The same goes for Myeongdong, a popular shopping district. Myeongdong usually so packed it's hard to move, but today the main street was almost empty, and so were the stores.
Because it's so hot, we haven't had any customers this month.
It's hot that now the government has declared the heat wave a natural disaster, and so customers only come when the suns go down.
If this goes on, there are worries about the danger to people's health and what the effect will be on local businesses. Hongyu, Arirang News.
A South Korean citizen has been held captive for almost a month by an unidentified group in Libya. Seoul's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said Wednesday that 1 South Korean and 3 Filipinos who were working on a water supply project in western Libya were abducted in a raid on July 6th by an unidentified armed group. The ministry publicly acknowledged the abduction after a video clip was posted on Facebook this morning showing the 4 men asking for help. It's not yet known who their captors are or what their motive is, but the ministry told reporters that the clip may be a sign the group wants to negotiate. The South Korean government says it will do its best to ensure the Korean man's safety. South Korea's Vice Minister of Unification, Chun Hae-sung, visited North Korea's Mount Kumgang today, where reunions will be held this month for families separated by the Korean War. The Vice Minister went to check progress on the renovations underway at the reunion venue. Mount Kumgang used to be a destination for tourists from South Korea until one of them was shot dead 10 years ago. The North wants the tours to resume and yesterday urged Seoul to work towards that. But the Unification Ministry says Chun's visit had nothing to do with tourism. Meanwhile, the two Koreas are deciding which of their citizens will attend the family reunions. They're scheduled to exchange the final lists this Saturday. Seoul says it's keeping a close eye on movements at North Korea's missile sites amid reports that the regime is working on new ICBMs. South Korea's defense ministry says it's closely monitoring the movements with the U.S., and Seoul's foreign ministry said it will also be keeping a close watch. The Washington Post reported on Monday, quoting unnamed U.S. intelligence officials, that North Korea is building 1 or 2 ICBMs at its Sanumdong factory on the outskirts of Pyongyang. The factories produced 2 of North Korea's ICBMs, including the Hwasong-15 tested in November last year, which can travel up to 13,000 kilometers and could theoretically hit the mainland U.S. Dialogue, meanwhile, between Japan and Russia. They held their third 2+2 meeting on Tuesday involving their ministers of foreign affairs and defense. They focused on resolving the territorial dispute over the Kuril Islands, which Russia claimed at the end of World War II. On North Korea, both sides agreed that the regime needs to get rid of its nuclear weapons. Kim Yo-san tells us more.
The foreign and defense ministers of Japan and Russia met in Moscow on Tuesday to discuss issues of common interest.
Russia is an important neighbor, and we hope that by maintaining dialogue and cooperation, it will lead to the moment when hazardous situations and tensions don't arise.
Japan and Russia discussed using economic cooperation to resolve an ongoing dispute over 4 Pacific islands, which Russia calls the Kuril Islands and Japan calls the Northern Territories.
The business ventures by Japanese entrepreneurs with the participation of Russian partners will take place within the framework of the preparation of joint economic projects on the Southern Kuril Islands on August 16th through 20th this year. Following the results of this business venture, we will arrange the dates of the next round of consultations on joint economic projects within the framework of work on the peace treaty.
During the talks, Tokyo also explained that the Japanese missile defense system, including the Aegis Ashore, is not a threat to Russia, but purely a defensive system. Japan and Russia also touched upon the North Korean nuclear issue, agreeing to cooperate closely to achieve their common goal of denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. The possibility of a summit meeting between President Vladimir Putin and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in September on the sidelines of the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok was also discussed, and the two countries agreed on an annual ministerial level 2+2 meeting. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
And turning to the economy, the South Korean government has released the figures for the country's exports in July, and it was the 5th straight month they surpassed $50 billion. The data show a recovery from the dismal figures recorded in June, so this could be a sign of strength in the local economy. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Korea's exports surpassed the $50 billion mark last month, recovering from a dip recorded in June. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said Wednesday the country's exports recorded nearly $52 billion in July, an increase of more than 6% from the same period last year. This is a big improvement compared to June, when exports dipped by nearly 0.2% on year. 10 of the 13 main export items saw increases, including petroleum and petrochemical goods, steel, semiconductors, machinery, and computers. Semiconductor exports in particular increased for the third consecutive month in July, surpassing $10 billion, the fourth highest monthly record ever. Exports of computers also increased for the 16th straight month in July. Meanwhile, exports in shipbuilding dropped by a staggering 73.4%, followed by home appliances, which dropped by nearly 16% on year last month. Auto exports dipped for the 6th straight month in July, falling by 13.5% from July last year, as shipments to Korea's biggest auto export market, the U.S., slumped, following U.S. import restrictions. Exports to China and South American countries increased the most, growing by around 27% and 23% respectively. Exports to the ASEAN region and India dipped due to increased local competition. Imports also increased by more than 16% in July on year to record nearly $45 billion. The trade surplus for July was more than $7 billion. It was the 78th straight month it has been in surplus. The ministry cites favorable economic conditions in the global manufacturing sector, increases in gross domestic product among major economies, and increases in unit prices of main exporting goods for the strong export figures. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
Generals from South and North Korea met on Tuesday to look at ways to reduce tensions on the inter-Korean border. This was something the leaders agreed to do at the Inter-Korean Summit back in April. Both sides say the talks went well and that they've reached some agreements in principles, namely to draw down some forces at the joint security area on the border, but they stopped short of releasing a joint communique. Park Ji-won has the details.
The two Koreas reached a mutual understanding on the principle of disarming the joint security area in the DMZ, the joint recovery of war remains in the DMZ, and the withdrawal of troops at some guard posts as a pilot program. South Korea's defense ministry explained the mutual understanding is sort of a broad sense of agreements in principle, and the two sides will work on specific and detailed implementations in later talks. Tuesday's general-level inter-Korea military talks started 10 a.m. and ended at around 6:30 p.m. Korea time at the border village of Panmunjom. The two sides didn't adopt a joint communique, yet both sides said the talks had gone well.
I think our talks were done in an earnest and sincere manner, as the items on the agenda are all very important and can become substantial measures for easing inter-Korean military tensions and building trust. I think the two Koreas' militaries can play a significant role in establishing perpetual peace on the Korean peninsula if the two sides continue to study and work on implementing the agenda items.
We fully understood the South's views, and I think our views have been fully delivered to the South. In that regard, the talks were very productive and brought joy to people in both Koreas. I think if we continue to have this attitude and stance of caring and helping each other, many problems will be solved. All items we discussed have historical significance in inter-Korean relations.
During the talks, the South Korean delegation also invited the North to this year's Seoul Defense Dialogue, scheduled to take place from September 12th to September 14th in Seoul. This is the second time this year the delegations meet for talks on Tuesday, with the first meeting taking place in mid-June. At that time, the two sides agreed to restore military communication channels on the western and eastern sides of the peninsula, with the western military communication channel being completely restored earlier this month. And for now, the two sides said they do not have any specific plans for another round of military talks soon. 박지원, Arirang News.
Now, to further discuss the outcome of these latest inter-Korean military talks, we have with us Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you.
Now, the meeting between the two militaries officials of South and North Korea took place. It seems to have been a mixed bag of results. On one hand, they promised to lower tensions, but on the other hand, they also didn't sign or reach some sort of a joint communique. What is your assessment of the talks yesterday?
Well, I think at least the fact that North Korea was the one that have proposed this meeting is something very positive, because North Korea never proposed this kinds of meeting to lower the tensions in the Korean peninsula. And I think still some agenda had come up with some agreement, even though did not come out with some official statement. Two sides have agreed upon disarmament at the joint security area, and also agreed upon the pulling back the guard posts within the demilitarized zone. Also agreed upon the jointly finding the remains within the demilitarized zone. So I think this is very positive outcome. I mean, even though they did not specifically agree upon some details that's needed to accomplish these three agenda, but I think at least in principle they have agreed upon these issues, and they have agreed to continue talks for detailed discussions about all these issues. I think it's very positive.
But it does seem a little strange. As you mentioned, North Korea did invite South Korea to the talks, but they seem to be unwilling to kind of have a joint statement or joint communique. Why do you think that is? Was there something getting in the way? There's still something unresolved between the two Koreas right now.
Maybe something related to the current moves of North Korea to push South Korea and the U.S. for the declaration issues, declaration of the end of Korean War. North Korea knows that time is not on the side of North Korea. Sanctions would continue. And if that happens, I think North Korea would still have to muddle through the distressed economic situations of North Korea, which is no good for Kim Jong-un's power consolidation. And I think North Korea knows that the the first deadline that North Korea can get something from the United States is November, which is the dates for the midterm elections of the United States. And I think until then, North Korea wants to get as much as it can from the United States. And I think what North Korea wants now is declaration of the end of Korean War. I think through which North Korea wants to lift sanctions. The U.S. is not moving. So I think North Korea wants to use South Korea to go forward to that objective and outcome, I think.
You mentioned there the sanctions on North Korea. A North Korean newspaper on Tuesday said that South Korea needs to lift the sanctions to improve inter-Korean relations, and that's the only way. And then they made quite a strong call, and one which South Korea won't be easy to fulfill right now. What do you make of the fact that North Korea has called for this so strongly?
As I have mentioned, maybe North Korea thinks that South Korea is the one that can lift sanctions. Of course, some issues related to the coal import from North Korea to South Korea via Russia has been an issue. Of course, from the U.S. perspective, the U.S. high-level official visited South Korea and talked about this issue, South Korea's violations of international sanctions. So I think South Korea is also cautious about not to violate the international sanctions on North Korea. But I think North Korea, I think, have to use South Korea to violate sanctions, and by which they can make the mood in the Korean Peninsula more economically oriented situations. Now South Koreans and China, North Korea, they are ready for economic exchanges and cooperations, and the sanction itself is now huddled. Once sanctions lifted, I think they can very quickly, escalate the mood for the economic cooperation between North and South Koreas, which is very big changes in the mood of the Korean Peninsula. And if that happens, I don't think it would be really easy for the President Trump to go back to the maximum pressure policies. And I think that's what North Korea is now trying to achieve right now.
South Korea's Vice Unification Minister, Chun Hae-sung, went to North Korea on Wednesday as well, supposedly to inspect the venues for the separated family reunions event, which is set to take place later this month. But it seems odd that the Vice Unification Minister would go for this kind of purpose. Do you think there might have been some sort of other motive?
North Korea requested something like the resuming the tourism at Kumgang Mountain and also reopening the Gasan complex, industrial complex to South Korea. The South Korea is kind of unwilling to do that because South Korea knows that it is the violation of sanctions. And U.S. expressed clearly that it supports the shutdown of Gasan complex, which implies that South Korea should not do this, which implies the violation of sanctions. Chun Hae-sung's visit, Vice Minister of Unification, officially is to check out the venue of reunion of separated family. But I think some rumors says that he's kind of visiting North Korea to check out some possibilities of tourism issues, Gasan complex in the issues. But I don't think it would be easy for South Korea to do this unless there is some positions by the United States to make this as exception of international sanctions. I think South Korea and the U.S. I think would be closely talking and discussing these issues to make this as exceptions of sanctions. But we'll see how it goes.
If you ask Washington right now, they'll probably say that the biggest hurdle towards improving relations with North Korea is that they need to denuclearize. And it seems like they haven't really been making progress on that. There are reports from the Washington Post the other day which said that North Korea is still working on new ICBMs. The question is, how far? First, the question I want to ask is, how far can we trust these kinds of reports from like the Washington Post and other U.S. media sources?
Maybe true or maybe not, because the U.S. has a lot of sources of checking out how things are evolving within the territory of North Korea. Throughout the satellites and a lot of intelligence, maybe the U.S. knows how North Korea is behaving, and maybe we can trust some part of the Washington Post reports, not because it's wrong or right, but because maybe this is just a gesture of North Korea. Maybe North Korea is not seriously developing ICBMs, but kind of trying to look like they're developing ICBMs, kind of message to the United States. That if the U.S. is not doing some measures that's requested by North Korea, for example, declaration of the end of Korean War or something like that, North Korea can go back to the past behaviors, develop ICBMs and develop and test to develop nuclear weapons, go back to its last year's postures and policies. That's kind of warning and messages to the United States. So kind of a way to pressure the United States and South Korea so that they can accept the request by North Korea for the declaration of the end of the Korean War.
So there's some sort of media that they're playing, some sort of tactics they're playing. But I've also read reports that actually experts aren't that surprised about the fact that North Korea are still producing weapons. I'm guessing you wouldn't be either?
The fact is that now in the United States, especially within the Washington, D.C. area, elite scholars, congressmen, they're very skeptical about North Korea because they think that even though North Korea did something serious, important, like destruction of nuclear test sites, missile engine sites, and also the repatriation of American soldiers' remains back to the States, even though North Korea did all these things, these are not the core issues that the U.S. wants from North Korea. What the U.S. wants is to denuclearize North Korea, denuclearize what North Korea already possesses, get rid of and remove all the weapons and WMDs and ICBMs that North Korea already possesses. But North Korea is not doing anything about this. When Pompeo visited Pyongyang, he requested that there should be timeline of denuclearization, and also North Korea should declare what it has already. But North Korea is not doing anything about this. So that's why the elites in DC is very skeptical and not surprised of what Washington Post has reported about the North Korea developing ICBM again.
The problem with this kind of drawn-out kind of process, North Korea have started to show some signs that they're denuclearizing. There were some satellite photos which showed some of their key missile facilities being dismantled, and they've shown good signs as well by returning the remains of US soldiers the other day. But if it drags out this long, doesn't it put the sincerity of North Korea's words about promises to denuclearize under question? Do you think there is some way eventually that they will lead truly to denuclearization?
Do
you think they will really eventually lead to denuclearization through this kind of process?
Maybe or maybe not. Maybe Kim Jong-un would think that, okay, nuclear weapons and ICBMs is very important leverage vis-a-vis the United States. That's a very important tool to support its regime and power. So cannot give up these weapon systems unless there is measures by the states for regime stability and regime guarantee. So that's something, the reason why North Korea is wanting something from the states first before it gives up its nuclear weapons. But maybe rather negative perspective is that, okay, Kim Jong-un would never have thought seriously about denuclearizing itself. So these two perspectives are still there. We don't know which one is right, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe time will tell. Negotiation would continue, especially after the midterm election is over. I think there will be a timeline, a red line, after which things are not going well. I think some kinds of policy change from Trump government would ensue at that time.
What more do you think North Korea needs to do to try and convince Washington that they are moving towards denuclearization? And how far can they really go?
Serious measures to denuclearize itself. I mean, we know it's a long process to denuclearize itself. I mean, CVID is a long process. I mean, President Trump mentioned that he will complete significant parts of CVID until the end of his term. North Korea has to declare what it has first, and inspectors go in and verify what North Korea have declared, after which there will be measures to disable and dismantle those weapon systems. So throughout, we have to go through all these procedures, and the first step, declaration, is something that U.S. wants right now, and North Korea has to do it so that the sincerity of denuclearization should be delivered to the United States.
Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you for coming in as usual, Professor, even in this rather hot weather that we're experiencing right now.
Thank you very much.
That concludes our show for today, but do stay tuned to Arirang for our later newscasts to catch up on the latest updates from Korea and around the world. Thank you for watching and hope you join us again next time. Goodbye.